Welcome to today's senior speeches for the class of 2025. Our first speaker today is Ward McGill. Ward will be introduced by a family friend, Magnus Gustafson.
All right, glasses. Good morning, everyone. My name is Magnus Gustafson, and it's my honor to get a chance to introduce Ward for his senior speech. I'm sure a few of you guys wonder why I am the one having this honor and introduce him, and quite frankly, so do I. The first time I ever met Ward was on the tennis court. His dad brought him to me in hopes of making him a stud on the tennis court. Once we got out there, I realized that Ward was not only not totally on board of being a tennis player, he was extremely shy, and I remember him saying yes, no, and once in a while threw out an okay. He also tried very hard to try to make contact with the tennis ball, but in the middle of the growth spurt, he didn't really work out that well. So let's say that tennis at that time was not Ward's cup of tea at all. After that first lesson, I never got a phone call from McGill's, and which didn't surprise me. Ward and I didn't really have a great connection when it came to the game of tennis, and lucky for me and him, Miss McGill never called me, because later on in life, Ward found his true love of sports, which is squash. And I'm not sure if you all know that, but he has committed to Connecticut College, and he's going to continue to be a student athlete. And continue to be a student athlete obviously in squash, and I do take full credit for that. Because if it wouldn't be for that lesson, he'd probably still be playing tennis. So, Ward has become become my youngest son's one of his best friends, and he spent a lot of time at our house. And I would say that he's become a part of the Gustafson family, and an extra brother for Patrick. And those two guys together, I'm telling you, I'm not sure if you heard Ward talk about as many unimportant things as he and Patrick can talk about. Sometimes my wife and I look at each other and we're saying, I don't really think the college is going to be in those guys' future. However, Ward has proven us wrong, but the jury's out on the other guy. There's obviously a lot more in Ward's world than squash. He's a really good student. He's a hard worker, respectful young man, and a very, very good friend. He's just one of those guys that I think most people want to be around, which is obviously a great quality going on in life and making it out to college and into the real world. But I do have to mention that, or maybe this is a confession, that I hired Ward and my son Patrick to work at the club where I work in the summer. The best way of explaining it, the days when they work together, is like a blind leading a blind. They will usually be found in the snack bar or zooming around on the club golf cart when they actually need to do something important. But despite all of that, I have no doubt that Ward McGill is going to continue to grow, become even a better person, doing great, as he go on to Connecticut College. And it's obvious that he has managed to succeed at collegiate, excel in squash, and more important than that, becoming a very, very good person. So with no further ado, it's my honor to introduce to you Mr. Ward McGill.
Morning. There are studies that prove that just smiling can make you happier. I always thought that there was no way this could actually be true, until I noticed it through my own experiences. I first discovered this phenomenon last year during a squash tournament. I never really knew how to motivate myself to play my best. I would usually listen to music or try and hype myself up before. But looking back, I think all this did was distract me from actually playing and would get me too excited or too nervous to play. I really learned what motivated me during my first round of this tournament. I decided at the start of the match that I would just smile after every point. No matter what was happening, I smiled. I went into the match expecting to lose, so I just thought I would try this out because I really had nothing to lose. During this match, I played great. I was so much more positive than usual. No matter what happened to me, it didn't negatively affect my game. If I lost a point or got a bad call, I would just smile at my opponent and then forget about it. Now, after listening to the story, you may be thinking that my motivation comes from an internal place, looking to be my best self through staying positive. You would be wrong. At the start of my match, I started smiling to stay relaxed and focused, but by the end, I was smiling and even laughing at my opponent because I realized it was freaking him out. My smile messed with his head and hurt his performance. I realized that my motivation in certain aspects of life comes not just from being happy, but being happy when I succeed because of someone else's failures. This seems like a pretty messed up thing to admit, that I get joy out of my opponents being unhappy. But after this specific match, I look back on past matches and realized that I would be the happiest and play my best when my opponent was freaking out. During all my matches now, I make sure that I smile as much as possible, because not only does it make me happier, but it does the opposite for my opponent. Even if they're winning, it's still confusing to see someone in a bad position smiling. It disarms you and you don't know how to feel. I get so much enjoyment out of knowing that my opponents are mad because of me, not because I've said anything nasty to them or humiliated them in some way, but because of the simple act of smiling. Another instance where I got motivation from my opponent's shortcomings was during Miss Lerner's pre-cal class last year. My opponent wasn't actually an opponent, but my desk mate Cyrus. Now, I will admit that my opponent usually bested me in this class when it came to tests, quizzes, and generally just understanding what was happening. But for 1 week, I was the top dog of that table. This week of dominance was the result of a new concept, the unit circle. I could tell Cyrus was clueless because instead of me asking him questions, he was asking me questions. I, of course, would help my opponent or peer, but not before I took the time to soak in the feeling of superiority and make fun of him for being worse than me. My reign of dominance was short-lived, but seeing the look on Cyrus's face when he had to ask me a question in class was the best motivation I could receive. Now, I'm not always this petty. Sometimes my best motivation for success is the success of others. One such example is when Jack Blythe was playing the deciding match at our national teen tournament last year to take us to the semifinals, and it was coming down to the wire. During this match, I cheered my heart out. Supporting him and watching him play with such intensity was motivating me for the next match. While I was watching, I wasn't thinking about how good it would feel to beat the other team. Okay, maybe a little bit, but I was mostly thinking about how I wanted Jack to win and how good it would feel for us to win for each other. After he won the match, I wasn't thinking about how we beat the other team. I was just thinking about how happy I was for my teammate. Reflecting on this topic of motivation and performance through this speech has helped me in a variety of ways. I see some pettiness that I would like to work through, as well as a great strategy I can continue to use to rattle my opponents on the squash court. More importantly, I see the power of mind over matter and the power of a team. I have a strategy to put myself in a better mood and know that being part of a squash team has made me a better person. So even if you might look a little creepy, consider what impact randomly smiling might have on your day. Thank you.
Our second speaker today is Frank Yates.
Good morning. When I was little, my family moved from Detroit to Louisville. My entire family lived in Michigan, and we didn't know anybody in Kentucky. We would be starting a brand new life with a new house, new jobs, and new friends. My parents found a tiny Catholic school where I spent almost the entirety of elementary and middle school. There were around 15 people in my grade, and most of them had also spent their whole lives at this school. These were the only people I knew in the city, and I had become very close with them. In the 7th grade, though, when COVID had just started to pick up, my parents got an email from the school. The principal announced that the school would be closing after this year and that everybody would need to find somewhere else to go. This terrified me, as I didn't really know anyone that went anywhere else, and I had no clue where I would end up or how I would meet people. Luckily, we had been touring high schools, and only one of the schools we visited had a middle school. I didn't know anyone at Collegiate. Actually, I had never even heard of it until my parents suggested we take a look at it. And I came during prime COVID at the start of 8th grade, which definitely didn't make it any easier to get comfortable. Once we had finally returned to in-person school, I was quiet. I didn't really talk to anyone and just kind of kept to myself most of the time. I didn't really know how to talk to anyone new, since the only people I used to talk to I'd known for most of my life. I didn't even really seem to know who I was or where I thought I belonged, since I had been in the same place for so long. For a while, I didn't really even try to talk to people, since I was so worried that I'd say something stupid or awkward. I realize now that I was terrified of being rejected and not fitting in, that my own fear was crippling me socially. One day, I decided that I was tired of being quiet and feeling isolated. I decided that I was going to start talking to people, no matter how stupid or awkward I sounded. This step was scary, but also liberating, because I was coming out of my shell and not letting fear control me. It was rough for a while. I kind of floated around trying to find out where I would fit in. I heard that a lot of people were going to be playing lacrosse, so I decided to give it a shot, since I didn't have much to lose anyway. I didn't know how to play lacrosse, and I wasn't even entirely sure what it was. To nobody's surprise, I was pretty bad. But no matter how many times I got knocked over or dropped the ball, I was having fun, and it gave me a way to meet people. I met some of my closest friends playing lacrosse in 8th grade and freshman year, and they have been my closest friends throughout high school. I took a lot of big risks, going to a different school than all of my old friends, playing a sport I've never heard of, and most importantly, deciding that I didn't care how stupid or awkward I sounded. If I didn't take these risks, I think I'd be an entirely different person. I wouldn't have met any of my closest friends, and I would still be sitting there, quietly worrying about what people thought of me. I wouldn't be comfortable enough with myself to joke about my own failures and problems, and I would have never experienced some of my best memories. About the same time as my settling in at Collegiate, my grandfather passed, and his death reinforced the lessons I was learning. When we would visit my grandparents in Michigan, my grandpa would often be left to entertain me and my cousins. He would take us on walks down the street to the church parking lot. There, we would pick flowers to bring back to my grandmother. The flowers wouldn't last long in the vase on the kitchen table, but in the little time they had, they made everyone happier. He was kind, thoughtful, and loving. I've never lost someone that close to me. I learned the hard way that life wasn't going to last forever, and I didn't want to spend mine being quiet. I didn't want to spend the time I had being afraid of what people were going to think of me, or sitting in silence because I was worried I'd sound awkward. I didn't want to do the same things for the rest of my life because I was afraid to try something new. If I wouldn't have taken the risk to come out of my shell, I would have never been able to experience some of my favorite memories. I wouldn't have experienced any of the post-game Chick-fil-A meals, late-night Fortnite lobbies, or after-lunch basketball games that have become some of my favorite memories. When people think about going to college, they think of new opportunities and chances to meet people, but you don't seem to realize how much you're leaving behind until it's about to happen. I'm really grateful for everybody that I've met at Collegiate and for how far I've grown during my time here. In their 2011 single, The Motto, Drake and Lil Wayne taught me that you only live once, so there was no reason for me to sit around being scared. The best decisions I've ever made were huge risks, or at least felt like huge risks at the time. Fear can overwhelm and paralyze. Working through it can be tough but freeing. So play that sport you're bad at, apply to that school you're not going to get into, talk to those people you've never met, because being afraid isn't going to get you anywhere. Thank you.
Our third speaker today is Ben Rauen.
Good morning. The idea of writing this speech has made me lose sleep almost every night for the last 2 weeks. At night, I stay up thinking, how am I supposed to possibly live up to the standard set by the likes of Robbie Himes, Jeremy, or anyone's grandpa? But it really started to become a problem. I had nothing to say. I had to get up here for at least 5 minutes in front of my peers, parents, teachers. So, in trying to come up with ideas for this speech, I realized that stress and pressure have always been something that's kept me up at night. So today I wanted to try and share some of those experiences and how I come to terms with them. Something that used to keep me up at night was all the times I've almost wrecked or damaged my car and the one time I did. On average, I get decently close to wrecking my car like maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. I don't have precedence with the fact that I'm not a bad driver. I just drive on the highway for about an hour and a half most days. And with that, I've also learned that there's got to be at least a decent chunk of the population just driving around on drugs. It started on the first morning I ever drove myself to school. I left at 6:50, excessively early, and still got to school 45 minutes late at 9. That morning, I sat in traffic for over 2 hours, and immediately after parking in the closest spot, a 15-minute walk from school, some guy hit my mirror because he was going 45 in a neighborhood during a storm. Understandably, I was pretty freaked out that morning, and this started my terrible luck and stress with driving. It started a cycle where I drive for about 2 weeks, almost wreck, and go back to normal. The majority of the time I almost wreck is because of semi-trucks trying to merge and not seeing my car because it's low to the ground. And because of this, I've consistently had to either slam the gas or my horn to keep truckers from turning into the lane I'm in and pushing my car into the wall or off a hill. Another time I saw someone cross 3 lanes at once, so I thought they were drunk, and as I was pulling past the car, I looked over and there was literally just like an 8-year-old kid driving around and brake checking people in what was definitely his mom's Subaru. But after a little more than a year of experience on the road, I thought that I'd be safe driving, and while I had gotten used to the road, some things are just unavoidable. I was on the way home when the car in front of me swerved into the right lane about a foot away from hitting 2 tires that were sitting in the middle of the road. But this guy took up the only spot in the other lane. I was going over 60 miles an hour, and the tires were right in front of me. So I did the only thing I could, and I hit both of them head on. It actually did seem fine. There was a loud thud, but I did just hit a tire. And then a few seconds later, something metal dropped down from underneath my car and left a very visible line of sparks following me down the road. My car ended up being fine though. Some guy pulled over. I thought he was gonna help me out, but he just handed me a saw and told me to crawl underneath my car, which is about 6 inches off the ground, and to saw off my skid plate. It didn't matter how bad the problem was, I was not gonna get under a car that had just been sparking in the middle of the road. And so after crawling my way up under this car and 10 minutes of sawing through carbon fiber on the side of the highway, I did eventually end up getting it off. But by that point, I didn't even feel like I had a reason to be stressed about driving anymore, because over time it had taught me how to better handle more chaotic and stressful situations in a real-world environment. After an 8-year-old almost runs you off the road, you realize that the key to fighting back against stress is to just try and control what you can. I couldn't avoid the tires, but I could tear off my skid plate, which goes to show off how there are always opportunities to take control of your own life, even if it seems stressful or dangerous. Something else that used to keep me up at night was the stress and pressure I felt from school. Up until my sophomore year, I took school much more seriously. I just woke up at 6 a.m. every day, went to school, got home, studied, did homework, went to bed, and that was about it. Every day I used to do the same thing at the same time, and honestly, I was fine with it. My grades were pretty good, my parents were happy, and so were my teachers, and I could get by. It was something that was easy to maintain, and at that point, what else did I even have to be doing? I couldn't drive, and I live in basically the middle of nowhere. I started to feel stressed out because I felt like I had no control in my own life. It was just about doing whatever I could to put myself in the best position possible for college, and then for grad school, and then for a career, and that's all. My life stayed like this until I was finally given some autonomy when I got my license, and for the first time, I had been given some real independence. With that, I almost immediately realized that there are so many other meaningful ways to live life that don't entirely revolve around academics. Getting my license allowed me to spend more time with friends, pick up new hobbies, and to finally have control over my own routine. Taking the time to genuinely enjoy my day was so much more valuable than studying for an extra hour, which probably wouldn't even change my grade. I still put a good amount of effort into school, just a healthier amount. There's no point in planning for a future where you don't live for yourself. So now I show up to school at 8:10 every morning. If it hits 1 a.m. and I'm still doing work, I just stop instead of giving myself heart disease from too many Red Bulls, and if I occasionally get stuck in traffic and I'm late to school, it's just not that deep. I know I'm going to be fine because I know I'm going to do whatever it takes to do well, and why would I do anything other than that? While these moments caused me to lose quite a bit of sleep at the time, they haven't bothered me for a while. The reason something keeps you up at night isn't because it's stressful or nerve-wracking. Something keeps you up because it's overwhelming to you. I sit up because these moments felt so overwhelming and intense at the time that I just couldn't stop thinking about them. It had even gotten to a point where I was starting to become an insomniac, only getting 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night. But since then, I've come to the realization that stressful situations are just an unavoidable aspect of life. One of the only constants in life is stress and work, but gaining independence and control in my own life has allowed me to realize that there's so many overwhelmingly petrifying and difficult moments in everyone's lives, that the only way to make up for these bad moments is to try and make as many good moments to supplement them as possible. We have to get past what we can and hold on to what we want to keep. Like the multiple times that Colby's laughed so hard in psychology that he spit chocolate milk all over the floor. Or the time freshman year when King tricked most of our English class into skipping in the Scarbeck, making us miss an entire essay. Bad moments and days are inevitable, which is what makes it so important to make as many good memories as possible. So, in the spirit of making as many good moments as possible, I've actually prepared something. Hold up. Amy Sullivan, will you go to prom with me? That's all I have. Thank you.